is available, and then in dry season, wet season movement dynamics are all sort of well worked out. The problem has been that those systems are not respected by state authorities, not recognized, haven't been until quite recently. In Ethiopia and Kenya, we've seen a trend towards engaging with these pastoralist governance structures in a spirit of understanding, and in fact recognizing that they have a lot of knowledge to contribute to the management of those landscapes, which in fact currently produce over half of all the meat consumed in East Africa. But they're at risk because of the population growth, different districting, political changes in representation. The populations are expected to settle down, and that's quite destructive to the health and stability of these landscapes. So that's a response. In a response to climate change, they have the systems which were allowed to be, if they were allowed to be restored, they actually would be productive members of society.
Well, that kind of brings me to this next point, that indigenous peoples have developed certain practices and methods to cultivate the lands that they've lived on for hundreds of years, and or they possess a very specialized knowledge about their natural environment, and I think what I've come to appreciate is that in many cases they're more advanced than we are in terms of how you should manage land, how you should develop it. I guess to what extent are we exploring and learning from these traditional practices or types of knowledge, which could be not only supported locally, but then could be used elsewhere. It could be models elsewhere.
Well, the general pattern that we've approached in developing in programs that implicate or involve indigenous peoples is that of participation. We have a system that's well established now over the last 15, 20 years called the community-based natural resources management systems that have been implemented in dryland areas in southern, eastern, western Africa and in forested areas. Participatory land use management programs that involve indigenous peoples and all the other local stakeholders, and they're really involved at all stages of the decision-making process. So in that way, they are involved, but there is also always a risk of having others speak for them, in a sense, that we've talked about before. And that is an additional level of sensitivity we all need to bring to this. If you're involved in like we are in the Congo River Basin, the Central African Regional Program for the Environment has been in place now for 15 years, and it has been engaging specifically with the forest peoples. And there are, with our participant organizations, the implementing organizations, the NGOs who work there, like the Gorilla Foundation and such, they need to engage with the populations there to help protect them, because the indigenous peoples do recognize them as assets and know how to manage them, and that knowledge has to be capitalized upon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to give you a couple of examples, indigenous and local ecological knowledge is a major tool in combating desertification and the impact of climate change. And as you know, this refers to the knowledge, practices, and beliefs of indigenous people. In Mali, the Dogon peoples have a unique culture that survives in a stunning and harsh landscape. Their vegetation and tree resources are being decimated by overharvesting and desertification. USAID works with the Dogon to enhance sustainable ecotourism, to bring needed revenue to this poor part of Mali while protecting the cultural integrity of the Dogon people. So this is one area. We also work with the U.S. Peace Corps in Mali to help women protect precious indigenous trees whose fruits provide food and cooking oil and revenue in these parts of Mali. So these are two areas where we're working very closely with indigenous peoples to improve their livelihoods and protect the environment.
And I think that's great, and I want to commend the administration for doing that. But I also think that there are, again, examples of practices within indigenous communities that we can learn from too, you know, and that may be models for, you know, supporting other indigenous communities or other communities in general, you know, in other parts of the world. And you know, it's fascinating to me as I get to learn about some of these different communities, the innovation, the boldness in terms of some of the development, you know, the smart development in agriculture, even in terms of medicine. I mean, it's just, you know, sometimes there's a tendency up here to think of indigenous communities as somehow, you know, primitive, not part of the, you know, the regular, you know, all of us, you know, the kind of the so-called regular people, I guess. But the reality is, in many cases, in some areas, they're much more advanced. And so I'd like to think that as we move along here, that in addition to providing assistance, you know, in ways that we know we can be helpful, that we also learn from them, you know, and apply some of their practices in how we combat climate change and how we do better agriculture and that kind of stuff. So I think there's you know, there's a lot that, you know, we can learn from them. So
my own experience in Nigeria, Mr. Chairman, is that we were working with the National Institute of Health to do just what you say. We helped to build a lab in Nigeria where we were working with Nigerian scientists to look at traditional medicines and herbs and see how they're used in among the indigenous populations, and to use that knowledge to advance medicine here at home and globally. So there is a lot of transfer of information in our direction as well.
you mentioned a couple of examples of where we're helping in some of these communities. I mean, are you finding that indigenous communities are applying some of the directly applying for some of the assistance that we can offer? Maybe I guess the better way to question. I mean, where do they fit in, like into the Feed the Future initiative, for example? I mean, how do, are we? I think are they aware of these communities aware of the assistance and the protections and the support that we can offer?
That's an excellent question, and that's a question that we're addressing right now. Feed the Future is a new presidential initiative. We are working to develop strategies around the new program, and we will be reaching out to communities and indigenous populations to make sure that they are part of the program. In the agency, the USAID's new business reforms, we do have as one of our goals to do more direct awards to country and community and indigenous populations, so that we can work directly with them, building their capacity, learning from them, and working in partnership with them. So that's one of our major goals.
I appreciate that. And look, let me just conclude by saying that this commission cares very deeply about the issues facing indigenous communities, not just in Africa, but all over the world. We very much appreciate your service. We very much appreciate your dedication to this issue. I think we're kind of on the same wavelength here. But I'll end with just kind of an offer that if there are things that you think that are important for Congress to be more involved in and more supportive of, especially during these tight budgetary times, there's a bipartisan group of us who who will be more than willing to work with you. I mean, these are important issues, and I think to the extent that we handle them well, they reflect well on the United States. These are the kinds of things we should be doing. So I thank you so much for your testimony and for your service, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Our second panel will be with Rebecca Adamson, the president and founder of First Peoples Worldwide, one of the few Indigenous-led international organizations working to support, empower, and promote the priorities of Indigenous peoples on the ground. Ms. Adams, who is Cherokee, is well known for her asset-based development strategies among American Indians and Indigenous peoples. She's also the co-author of the book, The Color of Wealth. We also have at the table Philemon Nakali Loyale, who represents the Nagatam tribe, which is from the Omo Valley region of Ethiopia. He is currently in the United States and seeking political asylum. He left Ethiopia because of threats that he and his family received after speaking out against a dam that is being built that will adversely impact his people. And finally, Lavinia Currier, who is a trustee of the Sakuruna Foundation, a private foundation that promotes land and wildlife conservation and indigenous rights and livelihoods. Educated at the Putney School and at Harvard University, Ms. Currier is a lifelong conservationist, human rights activist, and filmmaker. Her most recent feature film is a Central African Republic and U.S. co-production that looks at the daily life of the Ba'aka forest peoples of the CAR. And if I messed anybody's names up, I apologize, and you can collect that for the record, but as I tell people, I'm from Massachusetts, and some people think we don't even speak English. So, Ms. Adamson, why don't we begin with you, and we welcome you here today.
Esteemed members of this chamber, invited guests, and in particular, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for the opportunity to bring before you the issues of Indigenous peoples in Africa. I also want to thank our government for the endorsement of UNDRIP. It was very meaningful for us. Here's something you probably don't hear often. In this panel, we have some good news. This is our chance to do well by doing good, by showing leadership in granting land tenure rights, backing the legal measures to enforce them, and supporting traditional land management techniques for Indigenous peoples in Africa. You can do the right thing, while also improving our economic well-being and increasing our national security. For many Indigenous peoples, you provide the only government form where we can have our say. Very few African countries even recognize the existence of Indigenous peoples, let alone provide them avenues for political participation. So we thank you very much for today. These roughly 21.9 million people are the most marginalized residents of the African continent. Their many cultures and ways of life are under threat, in some cases to the point of extinction. Survival for most depends on traditional lands foreign governments and corporations seize daily, generally the poorest, harshest terrain out there. Their continued existence and cultural practice is a testament to our dynamism, intelligence, strength, and community. We have a lot to learn from Indigenous peoples and those here today. You may have already contemplated human rights issues here at this committee. Unlikely you already have. However, have you considered that the rights of Indigenous people of Africa are vital to our national security? Today's conflicts across West Africa and the Sahara have their origins in policies that excluded Indigenous nomads for policymaking. Giving recognition to all groups, respecting their differences, and allowing them to flourish in truly democratic spirit does not lead to, but rather prevents conflict. Our national security interests are best served through assisting African states in the development of multicultural democracies with representation of all ethnic groups. Working models exist. For example, Kenya's 2010 constitution, passed by popular referendum, is the continent's first to enshrine the rights of Indigenous peoples. And the local divisions of General Motors, General Electric, and FedEx all report that they believe Kenya is on the right track. Not surprisingly, good governance is also good for business, American business. When we allow foreign governments and organizations to trod upon Indigenous peoples, our interests in upholding human rights, in opening up competitive markets, and in mitigating the conflict that fuels extremism suffer. Ethiopia serves as a reminder. It has investments from 36 countries, including India, Pakistan, China, and Saudi Arabia, and 896 foreign businesses. For them, the government forcibly resettled 15,000 people, impoverishing whole communities and denying them the power to contest or benefit from the land deals. Conversely, our Chamber of Commerce reports that the American firm seeks investments to employ Ethiopians to farm for local consumption and export where there is demand, investments that will not come to fruition without your involvement. Africa offers long-term growth opportunities, but without your attention, we will concede potential gains to our Chinese and Indian competitors. To help African markets emerge, you must support true tenure security. Besides commercial development, governments dispossess traditional land in Africa for national parks and conservation areas. Under the guise of conservation, over 1.5 million indigenous peoples were evicted from the homelands they have always protected for the intended purpose of protecting those lands. Conservation of our biodiversity is crucial, and we must support the 15,348 protected areas in Africa. But currently, indigenous people live in and protect 86% of the world's standing forests, and 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity resides in our territories. Again, there is a lot to learn from indigenous peoples. The U.S. funds multi-billion-dollar efforts to reduce and mitigate carbon emissions and billions of tax dollars for conservation. Using traditional stewardship practices, it costs $3.50 a hectare to conserve land and biodiversity on indigenous territories. Large conservation organizations spend $3,500 a hectare to do the same. Yet inexplicably, over 90% of the conservation funding goes to support the protected area strategies implemented by international NGOs. Africa's indigenous people know how to protect African lands, resources, and wildlife. They also have the most to lose from continued destruction. Global climate change and associated food insecurity has reduced some African indigenous communities to desperation as their cattle herds dry off and their crops wither. But there are almost no African wildlife professionals in large conservation projects. In the USAID Congo Basin Forest Partnership, spanning over 700,000 square miles across 6 countries, encompassing 24 million people, U.S. and European-based NGOs run the show. Not a single African conservation group nor indigenous representative voice is among them. Nor do these NGOs have indigenous peoples on their board. And this is after a previous Congo Basin initiative led to the eviction of 45,000 pygmies from their traditional forest homelands. We have 3 requests that we'd like to place before this esteemed committee today. The steps that we ask you to take might be small, but we think they're very important. We would like to see this commission consider the following actions: to recommend the Human Rights and International Organizations Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs be assigned legislative jurisdiction for indigenous peoples' issues, concerns, and interests. We would like this commission to consider directing the annual State Department human rights reports to contain sections for reporting specifically on the status of human rights of indigenous people in law and in practice. And in accordance with the human rights reporting under the Foreign Assistance Act, we would like this committee to request that the GAO perform an audit and report on the status of the internationally recognized human rights of the various groups of indigenous peoples. It's not often that the right thing to do also serves our vital interests. As a human rights undertaking, a demonstration of U.S. leadership in the world, an investment in our economic future, and a down payment on our security, we must take the rights and needs of indigenous peoples to heart, and we must act in solidarity to promote and protect them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your excellent testimony, and we'll now hear from Philemon. Can you pronounce your name for the record so I don't screw it up too bad?
Good morning, Chairman and Commission members, and greetings from Ethiopia. My name is Philemon Nakali Loyele, a member of Nyangatom community in southern part of Ethiopia.
I wasn't too off.
It's with a great honor and pride that I'm able to share with my experience with you today. I know my time is limited, but let me take a moment to publicly thank Tom Lantos, Human Rights Commission, Chairman James McGovern, and Frank Wolf, and of course, the U.S. House of Representatives for holding today's sharing on indigenous people of Africa. First, I would like to talk with you about the Gibe Dam project of Omo River. Secondly, I would like to mention some of the positive effects of the community conservation project that began with the Mursi and other indigenous tribes in our region. Currently, the downstream communities of the southern part of Ethiopia are already experiencing the negative impact of the Gibe 3 hydroelectrical dam upon their land and water bodies and upon their basic human rights to make a livelihood. These communities have not been consulted by Ethiopian government about the appropriations of their lands and waters. In fact, very few of us have heard any information about all about the dam and the impacts. But the native indigenous tribe have never had an idea what was going on by the Ethiopian government, and they have never been informed, and it was only the few of the elite or from the indigenous community who had an idea that something is going on. As indigenous people, we left out all decision making. We are left out of all decision making process on constructions of Gibe 3 dam. Ethiopian government did not visit in person or speak with any of our community representatives when they conducted their social and environmental impacts assessment. They sat in Addis Ababa and made their decisions without contacting through due diligence or talking with the indigenous community. They made a kind of research, descriptive research in which the community did know, and then they made some kind of descriptive which the community did not even give about, and they don't know what's going on. And they conducted the indigenous community. So who will be most affected by this project? So it wasn't based on the prior consents of the pastoralist communities, which are the downstream communities. I'm talking about downstream communities because the dam is built on upper stream of the Omo River, and the upper stream communities would be affected, and also the downstream communities. So I'm just here representing to you the downstream communities of Ethiopia, which is the southern part of Ethiopia. The government of Ethiopia holds hostile views of anyone critical of the dam, insisting that the opposition to the Gibe 2 dam comes 3 dam international. It was from the international NGOs, not from the pastoralist and hunting communities who will be directly affected by the Gibe 3. This is not true. We the Nyangatom, representing the others affected pastoralist communities in this hearing, oppose the dam because it threatens to adversely affects our way of life. It is not it's not outside the NGOs who are making the outside NGO who are making this decision for us, or the government, as our government claims. We the indigenous people oppose it but we do not have democracy in Ethiopia. Because we don't have democracy, we don't have voice to talk. Few of the elites of the indigenous or the minority group who would be affected by the dam, we don't have a right to speak in front of our Ethiopian government that there would be something affecting our communities, and we need to set up things. But we have no democracy, and the government doesn't want us to talk to them confrontally. And we carried this voice to the international community so that our voice would be heard from international communities and directed from international community to the government of Ethiopia, not from us who are within Ethiopia. And within Ethiopia, it's not only the Nyangatom who will be impacted by the Gibe 3 dam. It will also negatively affect the lands and waters of Mursi, Koegu, Karo, Murle, Suri, and the Dasanage peoples. And this negative impact will be far-reaching to include the Turkana communities of Kenya, northern part of Kenya. And this negative impact will be far-reaching to the will also bring measurable impacts, which are losing of lakes, fishing ground, and already these things had already happened. And now these communities have lost their fishing ground and farming lands, and now they don't have any agriculture anymore, and they are starving. They are dependent on aid from the government. The Gibe Dam is bad for the indigenous people of the South Omo region of Ethiopia. However, there is good news coming from the region too. Community conservancy projects are benefiting several indigenous groups in South Omo. The one I'm familiar with, this conservancy project started by the Mursi people. We are placing a great hope in what is known as indigenous community stewardship areas, or conservancies, as a sustainable foundation for livelihood and environmental protection in southern Ethiopia. With support for the First People Worldwide and International Land Commission, a group of Mursi representatives recently conducted experience sharing with 6 conservancies managed by Rendile, Maasai, Samburu communities in Kenya. Upon returning home to Ethiopia, the Mursi immediately decided to set up their own conservancy, and they have subsequently been joined in a community conservation initiative by the body Koegu and most recently Suri. Now, Nyangatom community, which I came from, they are also they have a plan to join the Mursi to share the experience the Mursi got from Kenya. So the indigenous community conservancy collaborative management initiative under the development in South Omo represents superior model of conflict resolution and mitigation mechanism, because these communities had been in conflict for many years and they have been fighting, and this would be enabled to bring them together and manage their resource and the livestock, the wildlife. I must sincerely hope that with today's great hearings as a starting point, the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission and United States Congress to take opportunity to address the total failure of the Ethiopian government to consult and receive consent from the indigenous peoples, whose lands and livelihood would be most negatively affected. Secondly, I would like to see U.S. Congress encouraging the Ethiopian government on behalf of the indigenous controlled community conservancies in South Omo. I'm speaking to inform you of our issues at a great personal risk to both my family and myself. I fear returning to Ethiopia because if I return, it is almost a certain I will be harmed, but I feel that my people and other indigenous groups of South Omo deserve basic human rights, and this story must be shared. I thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here. Thank you for sharing your story. It's important for us to hear. Ms. Karia?
Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to testify before the Tom Lantos.
I think you have to press the on. No, you got to press the.
Is it on now?
Yep, now you got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored to testify before the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. My name is Lavinia Courier, and I'm trustee of the Saturuna Foundation. Our main grant-making priority areas are land and wildlife conservation, indigenous rights in Botswana, Mexico, Canada, and the Central African Republic. The foundation has also supported Tibetan refugees and Tibetan independence. Since 2004, Saturuna has made more than $1 million in grants in wildlife conservation, Baka pygmy health, training and capacity building in the Zanga-Sanga region of southwestern Central Africa. Our primary mission there is to promote and sustain the rights and livelihoods of the Bayaka people that live in the reserve, in addition to supporting wildlife conservation. In the last 20 years, biologists and anthropologists have come to recognize that conservation of biodiversity is intimately connected to cultural diversity. I'm testifying as a witness today because of my interest in the region of Zanga-Zanga Park and Reserve, which began in 1999 when I traveled there as a World Wildlife Fund board member, then most recently directed the film Oka Ameriki, a fictionalized story of ethnomusicologist Louis Sarno, who has lived with Bayaka for 25 years in Yandumbe. This film, which was shot entirely in the forest of Zanga-Zanga and features Bayaka actors in lead roles, is the first Central African